My little party did not go too badly. Gray and Isabel arrived first, Larry and Sophie MacDonald 5 minutes later. Isabel and Sophie kissed each other warmly, and Isabel and Gray congratulated her on her engagement. I caught the appraising sweep of the eyes with which Isabel took in Sophie's appearance. I was shocked at it. When I saw her in that dive in the Rue de Lap, outrageously painted, with hennaed hair, in the bright green coat, though she looked outrageous and was very drunk, there was something provocative and even basely alluring in her. But now she looked drab, and though certainly a year or two younger than Isabel, much older. She still had that gallant tilt of her head, but now, I don't know why, it was pathetic. She was letting her hair go back to its natural color, and it had the slatternly look that hair was when it had been dyed and left to grow. Except for a streak of red on her lips, she had no makeup on. Her skin was rough, and it had an unhealthy pallor. I remembered how vividly green her eyes had looked, but now they were pale and gray. She wore a red dress, obviously brand new, with her hat, shoes, and bag to match. I don't pretend to know anything about women's clothes, but I had a feeling that it was fussy and too elaborate for the occasion. On her breast was a piece of showy artificial jewelry, such as you buy at the Rue de Rivoli, beside Isabel, in black silk with string of cultured pearls round her neck, and in very smart hat. She looked cheap and dowdy. I ordered cocktails, but Larry and Sophie refused them. Then Elliot arrived. His progress, though the vast foyer was, however, impeded by the hands he had to shake and the hands he had to kiss as he saw one person after another whom he knew. He behaved as though the Ritz were his private house, and he were assuring his guests of his pleasure that they had been able to accept his invitation. He had been told nothing about Sophie, except she had lost her husband and child in a motor accident and was now going to marry Larry. When at last he reached us, he congratulated them both with the elaborate graciousness of which he was a master. He went into the dining room, and since we were 4 men and 2 women, I placed Isabel and Sophie opposite one another at the round table, with Sophie between Gray and myself. But the table was small enough for the conversation to be general. I had already ordered the luncheon, and the wine waiter came along with the wine card. "You don't know anything about wine, my dear fellow," said Elliot. "Give me that wine card, Albert." He turned over the pages. "I drink nothing but Vichy myself, but I can't bear to see people drink wine that isn't perfect." He and Albert, the wine waiter, were old friends, and after animated discussion, they decided on the wine I should give my guests. Then he turned to Sophie. "And where are you going for your honeymoon, my dear?" He glanced at her dress, and almost imperceptible raising of his eyebrows showed me that he had formed an unfavorable opinion of it. "We're going to Greece." "I've been trying to get there for 10 years, said Larry, "but somehow I've never been able to manage it." "It ought to be lovely at this time of year," said Isabel, with a show of enthusiasm. She remembered, as I remembered, that was where Larry proposed to take her when he wanted her to marry him. It seemed to be the idée with Larry to go to Greece on a honeymoon. The conversation flowed none too easily, and I should have found it difficult row to hoe if it hadn't been for Isabel. She was on her best behavior, Whenever her silence seemed to threaten us, I racked my brain for something fresh to talk about. She broke in with facile chatter. I was grateful to her. Sophie hardly spoke, except when she was spoken to, and then it seemed an effort to her. The spirit had gone out of her. You would have said that something had died in her, and I asked myself if Larry wasn't putting her to a strain greater than she could support. If, as I suspected, she had doped as well as drunk, the sullen deprivation must have worn her nerves to a frazzle. Sometimes I intercepted a look between them. In his I saw tenderness and encouragement, but in hers an appeal that was pathetic. It may be that Gray, with his sweetness of disposition, instinctively felt what I thought I saw, for he began to tell her how Larry had cured him of the headaches that had incapacitated him, and went on to say how much he had depended on him and how much he owed him. Now I'm fit as a flea, he continued. As soon as ever I can get a job, I'm going back to work. I've got several irons in the fire, and I'm hoping to land something before long. Gosh, it'll be good to get back at home again. Gray meant well, but what he had said was perhaps not tactful if, as I suppose, Larry, to cure Sophie of her aggravated alcoholism, had used with her the same method of suggestion. For that, to my mind, was what it was that had been successful with Gray. You never have headaches now, Gray? Asked Elliot. I haven't had one for 3 months, and if I think one's coming on, I take hold of my charm and I'm all right. He fished out the pocket the ancient coin Larry had given him. I wouldn't sell it for $1 million. We finished luncheon and coffee and was served. The wine waiter came up and asked whether we wanted liqueurs. We all refused except Gray, who said he would have a brandy. When the bottle was brought, Elliot insisted on looking at it. Yes, I can recommend it. That'll do you no harm. A little glass for monsieur? Asked the waiter. Alas, it's forbidden me. Elliot told him at some length that he was having trouble with his kidneys and that his doctor would not allow him to drink alcohol. A tear of Zabrovka could do monsieur no harm. It's well known to be very good for the kidneys. We have just received a consignment from Poland. Is that true? It's hard to get nowadays. Let me have a look at the bottle. The wine waiter, a portly, dignified creature with long silver chain around his neck, went away to fetch it, and Elliot explained that it was Polish form of vodka, but in every way superior. We used to drink it at Radziwill's when I stayed with them for the shooting. You should have seen those Polish princes putting it away. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that they'd drink it by the tumbler without turning a hair. Good blood, of course, aristocrats to the tips of their fingers. Sophie, you must try it. And you too, Isabel. It's an experience no one can afford to miss. The wine waiter brought the bottle. Larry, Sophie, and I refused to be tempted, but Isabel said she would like to try it. I was surprised, for habitually she drank very little, and she had 2 cocktails and 2 or 3 glasses of wine. The waiter poured out a glass of pale green liquid, and Isabel sniffed it. "Oh, what a lovely smell, hasn't it?" cried Elliot. "That's the herbs they put in it. They give it its delicate taste. Just to keep you company, I'll have a drop. It can't hurt me for once." "It tastes divine," said Isabel. "It's like mother's milk. I've never tasted anything so good." Elliot raised his glass to his lips. Oh, how it brings back the old days. You people who never stayed with the Razdewills don't know what living is. That was the grand style. Feudal, you know. You might have thought yourself back in the Middle Ages. You were met at the station by a carriage with 6 horses and postilions, and at dinner a footman in livery behind every person. He went on to describe the magnificence and luxury of the establishment, and the brilliance of the parties, and the suspicion, doubtless unworthy, occurred to me that the whole thing was a put-up job between Elliot and the wine waiter to give Elliot the opportunity to discourse upon the grandeur of his princely family and the host of Polish aristocrats he hobnobbed with in their castle. There was no stopping him. Another glass, Isabel? Oh, I daren't. But it's heavenly. I'm so glad to know about it. Gray, we must get some. I'll have some sent round to the apartment. Oh, Uncle Elliot, would you? Cried Isabel enthusiastically. You're so kind to us. You must try it, Gray. It smells freshly mown hay, of spring flowers, of thyme and lavender, and it's soft on the palate and so comfortable it's like listening to music by moonlight. That sounds so good. I want to find out what that is and get some myself. I wonder if they still make it. It was unlike Isabel to gush inordinately, and I wondered if she was a trifle tight. The party broke up. I shook hands with Sophie. When are you going to be married? I asked her. The week after next. I hope you'll come to the wedding. I'm afraid I shan't be in Paris. I'm leaving for London tomorrow. Well, I was saying goodbye to the rest of my guests. Isabel took Sophie aside and talked to her for a minute, then turned to Gray. Oh, Gray, I'm not coming home just yet. There's a dress show at Molyneux's, and I'm taking Sophie to it. She ought to see the new models. I'd love to, said Sophie. We parted. I took Suzanne Riviere out to dinner that night, and next morning started for England.